Okay, Ezra chapter 7, as we're continuing to go through this saga of the Jews coming back to Jerusalem. I want to pause for just a second to talk about the kings of Persia. We've gone through King Cyrus and Artaxerxes and Darius. So I'll give you a little bit of understanding here if it's a little confusing to just kind of get this a little bit. It's important to realize Cyrus the Great, who we've seen, he was born around 600 BC. So right at the beginning, the book of Mormon took off. Cyrus was born. He ruled from 559 to 530 BC. He died about 530 BC. Was a great man. His son was Cambyses II, who was the next one that took over. Then there's Bardia that took over. Then Darius the Great that came in as well. Darius the Great came in about 522 to 486 BC. So we see Darius's name in the Old Testament as well. Darius's son Xerxes the First was 485 to 465, also probably known as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther as well. We've heard that his name before. That could be Xerxes the First. Then there's Artaxerxes the First after him, and then there's Xerxes the Second, and then Darius the Second, and Artaxerxes the Second, Artaxerxes the Third. So it's a little confusing, but I think most of these are the beginnings, not the second or third, but the beginning ones that are dealing with this. So if you remember Xerxes, we talked about, I think I mentioned that in chapter 5, that he's the son of Artaxerxes, which is Xerxes the Second. Xerxes the First is the dad of Artaxerxes the First. And I believe it's Xerxes the First, which is the one that was the Battle of Thermopylae. I believe he was the one that was there. So just to give you an idea of that's the names kind of jump around a little bit, but they're all in this era. So we're getting out of the 500s into the 480s, 460s time frame basically for the timeline of history. So in this chapter, chapter 7, we're getting more about Artaxerxes. Okay, so this is after Darius. Artaxerxes is in here to learn as well. And so this are the things that are done in the reign of Artaxerxes. So now they're going to go through the lineage of Ezra to establish him as one of the priests. And verse 6, this Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses, and which the Lord God of Israel had given, and the king granted him all his requests according to the hand of the Lord his God, who was upon him. And there went up some of the children of Israel, and the priests and Levites, and the singers and the porters, and the Nethinims unto Jerusalem in the 70th year of Artaxerxes the king. And he came to Jerusalem. So here's the thing, is they're saying Artaxerxes the king is the one where Ezra left. It's Cyrus. So there's a little bit of confusion sometimes in the names of these people where they were changed or adjusted. So you just have to realize that there's some incorrectness in the historical perspective of some of these stories here with these names of the Persian kings. Verse 8, he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. So this is kind of looking back. Okay, the first 6 chapters started with the, hey, Cyrus, we need to be let go to go back. And Cyrus went, you're great. This is great. Good thing for you to go do. Then they go back, deal with the Samaritans and others and go through this. And then they build the temple. They do that. So chapter 7 is kind of going back to tell a little bit more of the stories through that same period of time. So it's kind of not a full repeat, but we're going to get a little bit more information about that same time frame, basically. So if it feels like we've covered this, we have. Just so you know, the first 6 chapters have moved us into the future, but now Ezra 7 is bringing us back to about where Ezra 1 was. Verse 9, for upon the first day of the 1st month began he to go up from Babylon. On the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of his God upon him. And for Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. Now this is the copy of the letter that the king Artaxerxes gave unto Ezra the priest, the scribe, even a scribe of the words of the commandments of the Lord and of his statutes to Israel. So this is there's a letter from Artaxerxes to Ezra about all this that he's going to get into here in a second. But I want to talk about Ezra a little bit more. So we've got a little bit of background on who this man is. He is an established descendant of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, was the chief priest. So he is an Aaronic descendant, so he has that ability to be the chief priest. But he is really diligent about the commandments of God. He is a scribe. He knows how to write. He understands the value of the word, and he's concerned about this. So this is, there's a little bit more here from the book of the Cave of Treasures that talks about this. He says here, yeah, now when the people had gone up to Jerusalem, they had no books of the prophets. And Ezra the scribe went down into that pit wherein Simeon had cast the books. Remember, we talked about that in the end of 2 Chronicles. And he found a censer full of fire and the perfume of the incense which rose up from it. And thrice he took some of the dust of those books and cast it into his mouth. And straightway God made to abide in him the spirit of prophecy. And he renewed all the books of the prophets. So really cool, kind of a cool idea that, so he went back. Remember, we learned Simeon and some of the other priests as during the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. If you read the last chapter of 2 Chronicles, they were destroying everything. The place was being burned to the ground. So they were taking, the Babylonian leaders were burning the religious documents and the genealogies and the histories and things. So the priests gathered as much as they could up from them and says, let us gather these and preserve these and get them out of here. So they got them out. They had an old well. They buried him in that well, and he put a censer of fire, burning some incense on top of it. Now that would mean that incense would have to burn for like 50 years to be there. Maybe it burned for a while and then stopped and it was later found. Maybe it was kept up by the Jews who stayed in that area, who didn't get moved into exile. We don't really know, but it was a marker to know here's where we're at. Now the problem is when they dug up those books after all that time, they had degraded and fallen apart. Some were partially burned from the Babylonians. Some were in bad shape. I mean, it's a sandy area, sandy soil out there. So when it rains, it would just sip through. They weren't well preserved. They weren't put in, jars and things like the Dead Sea Scrolls were. The Dead Sea Scrolls were amazingly preserved. If you think about it, the type of pottery they used was a very unique pottery, not the same as everywhere else, because it was pottery that came up and had a lid that would seal onto the jar. They would put the scrolls, which were in a papyrus paper, put them in there, fill the jar with pitch, with pine pitch, basically. So it was like a lacquer, and that vacated all the oxygen out of the jars. Then they would put a lid on that would seal them, kind of like Tupperware, would seal onto the jar to keep them airtight. So it kept all the contents, they were watertight and airtight. Then, of course, they stuck them in the back of a cave and buried them with 2 or 3 feet of sand, and then made a bunch of bricks and walled the entrance to the cave up to hide it so no one would even know it was even there. That's how the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved and lasted for nearly 3,000 years that way. They are 2,000 years. They lasted a very long time. So these were just hastily dumped in and buried. So they degraded over the time with weathering and heating and cooling and things. A lot of challenges. So Ezra prayed and got the gift of prophecy to restore them. Now, in the book of Cave of Treasures, it says that he took the dust of these books where the pages had just fallen apart and degraded, and he put it in his mouth to metaphorically talk about how he asked for God to help him with this. There's another one that talked about this. According to the book of Adam, which is another ancient writing of apocryphal records that supposedly is some of the writings of Adam, or incorporates the writings of Adam and then goes through the rest of the Old Testament, the manuscripts in the library of the temple were burnt. Simeon begged the commander to give him the ruins of the library, and he went in and collected the ashes of the books and put them into a pot, which he placed in a vault. He filled a censer with coals and incense, and having lighted the fire, he set the censer over the place where the ashes of the books lay. The fire continued to burn until Ezra came to the vault, and the smoke of the incense was rising from the censer. He spread his hands thrice over the ashes of the books, and God gave him the spirit of prophecy, and he rewrote the books of the law and the prophets. Now that's Hugh Nibley talking about what was the similar story in the book of Adam, basically, that goes along with the book of Cave of Treasures. So interesting, Ezra kind of became known as the Lord's mouthpiece, the great scribe. Because of this, he received prophecy from God and he rewrote the laws of Moses. He rewrote the Old Testament. He rewrote things down. There probably still was a lot there that he could work from, but he focused on the teachings, which became the Torah, which is the very widely used Jewish religious scriptures. So that's this Ezra, kind of a cool story that we get. So now this is the letter. Let's jump back into chapter 7. This is the letter that is given from Artaxerxes to Ezra as this journey is happening, basically to restore Jerusalem. Verse 12, Artaxerxes, king of kings, unto Ezra the priest, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven, perfect peace, and at such a time. I make a decree that all they of the people of Israel and of his priests and Levites in my realm, which are minded of their own free will to go up to Jerusalem, go with thee. For as much as thou art sent of the king and of his 7 counselors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem, according to the law of thy God which is in thine hand, and to carry the silver and gold which is the king and his counselors have freely offered unto the God of Israel, whose habitation is in Jerusalem. All the silver and gold that thou canst find in all the province of Babylon, with the freewill offering of the people and of the priests offering willingly for the house of their God which is in Jerusalem, that thou mayest buy speedily with this money bullocks, rams, lambs, with their meat offerings and their drink offerings, and offer them upon the altar of the house of your God which is in Jerusalem. And whatsoever shall seem good to thee and to thy brethren, and to do with the rest of the silver and the gold, that do after the will of your God. The vessels also that are given thee for the service of the house of thy God, those deliver thou before the God of Jerusalem. And whatsoever more shall be needful for the house of thy God, which thou shalt have occasion to bestow, bestow it out of the king's treasure house. And I, even I, Artaxerxes the king, do make a decree to all the treasurers which are beyond the river, that whatsoever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, shall require of you, it be done speedily. Unto 100 talents of silver, and to 100 measures of wheat, to 100 baths of wine, and to 100 baths of oil, and salt without prescribing how much. Whatsoever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it be diligently done for the house of the God of heaven. For why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and his sons? Also, we certify you that touching any of the priests and Levites, singers, porters, Nethinims, or ministers of this house of God, it shall not be lawful to impose toll, tribute, or custom upon them. And thou, Ezra, after the wisdom of thy God that is in thine hand, set magistrates and judges which may judge all the people that are beyond the river, and all such as know the laws of thy God, and teach them that ye know them not. And whosoever will not do the law of thy God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily upon him, whether it be unto death, or to banishment, or to confiscation of goods, or to imprisonment. Blessed be the Lord God of our fathers, which hath put such a thing as this in the king's heart, to beautify the house of the Lord which is in Jerusalem. So he's talking about, so that's the end of the story, basically the letter of Artaxerxes. And so he's now saying how wonderful it is that we're being helped to do this. Verse 28, and hath extended mercy unto me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes, that I was strengthened as the hand of the Lord my God was upon me, and I gathered together out of Israel chief men to go up with me. So this is Ezra writing. He said, hey, here's what the letter is that Artaxerxes gave me to decree. Here's I'm so glad that this has happened, kind of a thing that he's adding to it, basically. So Persia is really helping Jerusalem out tremendously in reestablishing themselves at this time, which is really, really great. So let's jump over to chapter 8. The next chapters, we continue the saga of the beginning of the Second Temple period and the reestablishment of Israel.